Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Fraud and unwanted communication are endemic to digital economies, especially in emerging markets. Joining me to discuss building trust in communication is Alan Mamedi, CEO of Nasdaq-listed Truecaller. Alan, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having us.
What is the current state of the fraud and robocalling industry?
Well, what we see is that it's a growing pain point, basically on a global scale. We've seen the numbers growing basically every month since we started the company in 2009. Today, our users are receiving over 3 billion calls per day from unknown numbers. A big chunk of these are from bad actors trying to either harass users or scam them on money in different ways. And I think what's important to keep in mind is that this is their full-time job. They are clever and they find new ways to trick people. And I think another trend that we see is that because your smartphone is becoming more intelligent, all your services are connected to your phone, banking services, etc. It's even easier to scam people on money today than it was 5 years ago or 3 years ago. That's why Truecaller has become an even more relevant product today than it was just a few years back. And with over 300 million active users using our product on Android and iPhone, I think we're in for this for the long term.
Just how many calls and texts were identified in 2021, and how does that compare to other years?
Well, the number of calls and texts were over 700 billion actually last year. I don't recall exactly the number the year before, but it's definitely growing.
What types of fraud are on the rise, and what regions and industries globally and throughout the US are experiencing heightened amounts of fraud?
Well, what we're seeing a trend that is growing right now in the US for our users is definitely targeted towards elder people, where they claim to be from medical insurance companies, where old people that are in big need of their medical aids, they feel desperate and they pay these sort of bills that come in over SMS and so forth. But we're also seeing other type of scams, like the usual ones like IRS scams and so forth.
Yeah, they're pretty clever too, because they'll call from, let's say, example, Washington, D.C. area codes. So at first blush, it can be quite tricky and scary. And it's quite sad that this is what happens. Your first earnings report post IPO was quite strong. Where did the strength come from?
We're seeing strength coming from many places. Historically, we've been focusing a lot on emerging markets. That's where we have the largest part of our user base. Now, the last, I would say, 4 quarters, we've been focusing a lot on growing in the US market. We've been growing there quite nicely organically, but we see the opportunity and how this is becoming an even bigger problem, and that's why we're investing even more in the US market. One thing to add also on what you were saying is that today, with all these CPaaS services like Twilio, for example, it's so easy for scammers to actually generate a number on the fly that looks like your neighbor's number. But we're also seeing spoofing of numbers happening as well. And this is where we look at the signals. Like if there's a number that doesn't really match the standard of a format, or we see a number calling someone who's, and this caller hasn't called any other people in our Truecaller network in the past, then we look at these signals and we warn the user that, hey, you should be careful right now.
Alan, is there a way to identify where these bad actors are engaging? Can you trace a number, if you will? Is that even possible?
It's not. So this is more on an operator, like carrier level, basically. What we see and what our app sees is basically what you see on your screen. But sending that number to our servers and sort of analyzing it, it's like looking at the fingerprint. We can see certain things and sort of prevent these type of scams from happening. But exactly where the call is originating from, that's hard. We can't do that.
Right. But it doesn't, I guess, because we've seen so much more of this. Can the carriers even do anything? It just seems like there's an explosion of new calls and texts every day.
Yeah, I think there are ways for carriers to improve this. We've seen certain things like stir and shake, but that hasn't really worked. But we have to keep in mind as well that these scammers, this is their full-time job. Even if
Right.
the carriers try to block them, they will find other ways to do this. Also, I'm not going to blame anyone, but we should also be mindful that the carriers are actually making revenues on traffic in their network. So there are also incentives for carriers to have this sort of not necessarily scammers on their network, because in the end it might cause issues for them. But it is a big problem, and I don't think it's an easy problem for a carrier to solve. That's why we exist.
Right. So how do you think geopolitics, especially Russia, Ukraine as an example, can that impact building digital trust?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that we have a couple of 100,000 users in Ukraine. We see scams happening there, where certain people on the other side are in Ukraine calling with local SIM numbers, trying to get some information from the local people. So we built things during the last couple of days to try to prevent these things, to sort of help the citizens of Ukraine to be cautious when they get certain phone calls. But yeah, I mean, this is happening everywhere. It's not just related to what's going on there. I think cyber warfare in general is going to be one of our biggest issues in the coming years, and this is just the beginning of it.
And Alan, to wrap up here, what's your general outlook for the remainder of the year?
Well, we haven't given any guidance or so forth, but what we have said is that we're going to grow with 70%, which is a combination of revenue growth and use growth in the coming 3 years till end of 2024. We have over 300 million active users on our platform, so we're one of very few companies in the world with this amount of customers using our product, and we've been growing quite organically. I think one important aspect into this is that we're also a profitable company. So we're a tech company, high growth, but also profitable. And I think for us, it's important to be able to stand on your own legs. So we're very bullish about the future, regardless of what's happening. Truecaller is a service that people need every day, regardless if it's raining or if it's sunshine outside.
That's a very good point, Alan. Appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.